Welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. When you're ready to transform your sales for today's transforming market, we've got you covered with your host, the queen of cold calling and founder of Salesology, award-winning author, speaker, sales trainer, and coach, Wendy Weiss.
Hi, welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders. The art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. And I'm your host, Wendy Weiss. I am the founder of Salesology and the Salesology Prospecting Method. And I'm also known as the queen of cold calling. So today, our very special guest is Doug C. Brown, and his company is CEO Sales Strategies. Doug is the CEO of CEO Sales Strategies, and he's a sales revenue and profit growth expert. He's the creator of the Top 1% Academy, where he trains on how to sell to buyers, whether they're CEOs or business owners or entrepreneurs, and how to be in the top 1% of sales earners doing so. So welcome, Doug.
Hey, Wendy, thanks for having me here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I'm so excited to have you here and to jump into what it takes to be in that top 1%. So, but before we do that, I want to know the backstory. How did you become the CEO of CEO Sales Strategies? What's the backstory there?
Well, CEO Sales Strategies formed out of, I would say, other things that I've been doing all along my life, right? So I started working at the age of 3.5 for my dad, and he had his own business. And so we all kind of worked in that business up until about, we were maybe 18 years old, where I entered into the military and then into college. And all the way through, I was always selling, right? I was selling through all kinds of different areas. I sold music equipment while I was going through college to a lot of the very well-known and famous bands. It was one of the greatest jobs I ever had. And CEO Sales Strategies came about because I noticed that while I was working with clientele, one of the big things that they had was they had a challenge around developing strategy for their actual sales process. And so I was like, all right, well, I can help them with that. So that's how CEO Sales Strategies formed. And as we started going along in that, I learned that it wasn't just the leadership that was having challenges with that. It was also the sales team, the sales individuals. They were acting very tactically. They lacked leverage in their actual activities throughout the day. And so I was like, you know what, why don't I help people with that? I'll help them learn and think and act as a 1% earner in selling. And, one of the number one things we employ doing that is leverage in that whole process. So, and then, how to think and act like that as well.
Okay. So I'm curious, Brad, when you talk about leverage, what exactly are you talking about? How does that work?
Well, leverage. So if we think strategically, like tactically is doing one thing to get one result generally. So I make a cold call, I get a first appointment, right? That type of thing. And so leverage would be, I make a cold call, I get a first appointment, but I expand the sale right then and there internally or externally, where I get maybe 3 to 5 referrals out of that particular first thing that I'm trying to do. So everything along the stage of the process, the whole pipeline of the process, we're working on leverage to constantly expanding the sale or creating automation in processes where we can get things done, in a fashion where, let's say, we don't have to do them on a repetitive basis. So, for example, follow-up. How do I use follow-up and stay in touch with people sometimes for years, but I'm not having to each and every week or every month go out and utilize my own ability to sit down and craft an email, because that's too long. It takes too long. So how do I use things that are relevant and personal to people in my follow-up, but at the same time, how do I get it done? And how do I do it without me having to do it if possible? So I can focus more of my time on selling and expanding those relationships and getting more sales out of that process.
Okay, so how do you do it without you having to do it? Share the secret.
Okay, so firstly, it all begins with thought, right? So we have to firstly say, okay, I want to be a 1% earner and I want to create leverage. So, and not only we have to do that, now we have to step back and say, okay, let's look at what we're doing on a step-by-step basis. As we're going step by step, we want to ask this question: how do I expand this? How do I create more without having to do more? So that's the first question we always want to be asking ourselves. So I'll give you an example, Wendy. And like when I worked in the corporate space, I worked in the telecommunications industry. I worked for a company and we had inside reps, which I was a major account exec. And then we had outside entities, which were called agents. So agents were bringing business to us. They were independent sales entities. And the internal team was going outbound and we were getting our own sales, if you will. Now, we used to pay about 20, 25% on the outside agency for agents to go do this. So I thought one day, how do I get more people selling for me, but I'm an internal rep? So what I did is I created my own internal agency. So I thought I'll take the same concept and I'll employ it into the same concept. But what I'll do is I'll do the work or hire people to do the work internally. And I can still pay the representative, the agent outside, but now they don't have to do, because they had to do all the paperwork and follow customer service and all that. So I said, what if I could just recreate that, but I could take all that off their plate? And I did. And we paid them 5% versus 25%. And they were really happy to do that. So what happened was I now developed my own my external sales team that was driving leads into my queue every single day. And Wendy, at one point, I had 62 incoming calls a day coming in for leads. So then I had a real problem. And I'm like, okay, well, what's my problem now? I need leverage more. So I had junior reps I would pass these leads off to. When they closed the business, I got a percentage of that business. And so then it got to a point where I had to hire personal assistants to actually handle the volume that was coming through. So again, it's thinking more strategically on how do I get something to happen, but then how do I not make myself be the focal point of breakdown in that whole process? So in that case, I was outselling. Sometimes I certainly outsold I had a team of 9 that was, I was with. I was outselling the team of 9 combined every single month. So now I'm hitting all these big bonuses and I'm hitting all these things. So, and this is where I see people in selling not thinking as a 1% earner. When we have monies that are coming in, we need to allocate a certain percentage of those to growth. So just like a business owner would do, right? Business owner owns the business. They're going to say, you know what? I need a certain percentage of income coming out of this, but I'm going to reinvest that component back in. So I would strip off part of the bonuses, and then I would start doing outbound marketing with those bonuses to start feeding my agents the leads, and then you get what I'm saying? So it's all sticky. And then what happened was, if you think about an agent base, we were going after like phone vendors, and phone vendors had clients, sometimes 400, 500, 600 clients that they had been working for 10 years. So they trusted them. So now when we went in, it was like, go see Doug. It was pretty much a close. It wasn't like I had to convince them because the agent had set it up perfectly. So that's one form of leverage. Automation and technology is another type of form of leverage that a lot of people are trying to embrace, today. But, the whole key in this automation thing, Wendy, is making it personalized and relevant. Is that answering your question?
Absolutely. And I think what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, the difference between the people that are the top 1% and the people that aren't is the way they think.
Yes, they think the way because our thoughts give us action, right? Our thoughts give us decisions, which lead us to actions. So we think about a certain way and we act a certain way. It's not, that's the thing, between a top producer and a 1%er, there's really not a lot of difference except exactly what you say. how they think and how they act. And there's not a lot of difference between an average producer and a top producer, except how they think and how they act. So a 1%er is a combination of the top producer traits and what I call an elite producer. So it's an overachiever. And so when I look, for example, salespeople or sales representatives for myself, or, sometimes clients ask me, hey, can you help me out? We look for those two traits, the balance, the overachiever. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean they even have to have sales experience. An overachiever is that person that's never, ever, ever going to be at the top. They're always going to exceed that. So you look for that and say, like, they've got a 6-degree black belt in karate or something, or, something like, they're a high performing musician, or there's a high correlation between top producers and musicians. So that's one of the reasons I bring it up. So we look for those two traits, and then we look for the ego and empathy strength within. And that's usually what makes it up. But the wonderful thing is, Wendy, is it's trainable. So it's not like, you were born with this. It's trainable.
Okay. So I'm wondering where in your equation process must fit into this somewhere.
Absolutely.
Because one of my pet peeves, I'm actually on a mission to stamp out the myth of the born salesperson.
Yes.
Because I can't tell you how many business owners, even sales managers I've talked to over the years that tell me they've just hired someone who is a born salesperson, so they're just going to let them loose.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like saying I just have a teenager who I'm just going to let loose and give them, I don't know, $100,000 and go do whatever they want, right? So it's kind of like, you know what they're going to do. They're going to go do teenager type things, right? So every once in a while that does work out. But for the most part, you and I both know that, Wendy. I mean, natural born. See, a lot of people hire people because they like them. They think they're likable. They have these personalities that, oh my gosh, they're going to be great in selling or great in sales. Now, they may be charismatic. They may be able to build relationships, but that doesn't mean that they have the will to close. That doesn't mean that they have the desire to actually play win-win. All of these traits that make up a top, 1%er. And it doesn't even mean that they have a process around selling, as you were just alluding to, right? So they just, hey, I'm doing this naturally on my personality. But if you take that same person and bring them into an environment which is very structured in how they normally do their sales, let's say a high-end corporate environment, that person's not going to fare very well because they're going to run up against process issues that they can't even understand, right? So, why did the CEO bounce it down to a middle manager to make, some type of discovery process when they want to talk to the CEO? If they don't have a process for how to bring that back up ladder, they're never going to get to the buyer.
Absolutely. And so, but that's not really necessarily the fault of the salesperson. It's often the fault of the manager.
Yeah, it's the fault of so, in defense to people who are hiring people, because I've hired, I don't know how many now, certainly, multiples of hundreds of salespeople. Sometimes you just have a need that you got to fulfill bodies in, right? So it's kind of like, I got all this money bleeding out of my company, so I just need somebody there to handle the volume. So in that case, hiring mistakes happen. The challenge with people hiring, Wendy, is they don't have a process around hiring that is uniformed. So they have no way of having structured interviews or no way of having a structured hiring process. So it's going off gut feel, and that generally doesn't work well, right? I mean, we're talking 10, 15, 20% tops. So, they're not using the correct assessments. They're using personality assessments, for example, like a DISC profile or whatever. And that tells somebody about their personality traits, but it doesn't tell them whether or not they're a prospect. It doesn't tell them whether or not they have consultative sales style, right? So depending on what the person's looking for, you're absolutely right. The company is usually making the error because usually it's out of ignorance because they just don't know what a fully structured sales hiring process is is like. And therefore, what's happening is they're turning people over, and it's costing them tremendous amounts of money because, the average sales rep, it's something like 150% of actually salary is what it costs people, but there's a lot of lost revenue in other places where sales that they were working on never get followed up on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I find people too much in a rush when they're trying to hire salespeople, but there is a need. Sometimes you just got to fill bodies, and I've been in that position as well.
Right. And there's also the fact that when one person leaves, it sort of cascades, and you find like more people leave, whether that person left on their own or they were asked to leave.
Well,
people follow them out the door.
Yeah, and that's usually
another loss. Yeah,
that's usually poor leadership in the company that causes that. Mm-hmm. They're not communicating. A lot of times, it never ceases to amaze me that in organizations, they don't communicate with the sales people to actually find out what the clients are actually looking for. So, they're making decisions at an executive level, and they're not consulting the troops on the ground. And so when the troops are feeling, hey, I'm not valued, and then there's decisions that are made that affect the actual performance abilities of that salesperson is going to push back. So, when I was working for a company one time, I was the number one rep at the company. And I remember they said, we're bringing in Oracle, we're bringing in all these CRM systems, and we want you to put every conversation, every little thing into these things. We're going to have you henpeck type all this stuff in. And my brain went, heck no, there's no way I'm doing this. So I literally walked into my manager's office, and he said, you got to do this. This is coming down from the top. And I said, you have two choices. I'm your number one guy in this company. This is going to cost me a minimum of $25,000 in commissions, a minimum. I can see it now. So I'm probably going to lose somewhere between $25,000 and $75,000 this year in commissions. Now, this was almost 30 years ago. And so it's a heck of a lot more than $25,000 today. And so I said to him, I said, Dave, I love you as a person. You have two choices. Either A, you hire me a personal assistant and the company pays for it and they put that crap in the system, or B, I'm leaving and I'm going to our competitor and I'm taking all my clients with me. So you decide what you want to do, right? And so that might sound like I was a bad employee, but here's the bottom line. I had a wife, I had two kids, I wanted to put my kids in private school, all of this stuff. There was no way I was going to let a decision drag me back. Plus the other people, by the way, all of you have top producers, 1%ers, please understand they're being recruited always on a consistent basis. I always had 5-6 job interviews that I could go to in a heartbeat in that company. So they were all offering me more money to leave. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things that when the leadership is lacking in affecting the actual performance abilities of top salespeople, the company needs the people more than they need this, than the salesperson needs the company in most cases. So that's usually poor leadership, what I've seen, Wendy. And, I'm sorry for all of us CEOs have ever made that mistake, or people are running divisions and departments. But the reality is if your sales team's leaving in droves or in mass, it's not the sales team in most cases.
Very true. So then I'm going to pause for a word from our sponsor. And when we come back, I'm going to hold Doug's feet to the fire because I want to know what he learned about selling from music school. So we will be back. But now a word from our sponsor, the Salesology Vault. Just about every guest that I've interviewed on the Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders podcast has had a free gift for our listeners. So what we've done is we have taken all of those gifts and we have put them all in one place just for you. We call it the Salesology Vault, and it is packed full of free gifts from sales leaders, sales experts, marketing gurus, revenue generation experts. And we add another gift every single week. When we release the podcast on Monday morning, we add a gift. So you can log in as often as you'd like. You can download as many gifts as you'd like. And it's all free. So go to bit.ly/gift vault, or the link to the Salesology Vault is in the show notes. So as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, go to the notes, click on the link, download your gift. You will be glad you did. And we are back with Doug C. Brown, who is the CEO of CEO Sales Strategies. And I have to ask you a question, Doug, because I read in your LinkedIn profile that you went to the Berklee College of Music. And this is the question that I always ask all my guests that have a background in the arts. I interviewed Julie Hansen and Mike Neely. They were both actors. Of course, my background is I danced in a ballet company, interviewed Devin Roberts, also an actor. You went to music school and you played in a band. What did you learn that helped you?
I find a high correlation between the arts, if you will, Wendy, in general, and people who are successful in selling. And I think it's probably because of the creativity and the discipline we must have in order to be at the level that you are at as a dancer, for example, right? And so, and as a musician, one has to learn not just to be creative, but to how to be disciplined in the process of making sure that we're studying the nuances that make us stand out from all the other bands out there, so to speak, right? And so, because we all know people that we could say aren't great singers, but they're a number one in the forefront on the music charts, right, throughout the years. And we all know people who are amazing musicians that they never made it there, right? So there's a discipline to not only the creative arts, but there's a discipline to the business of being successful in the creative arts. And I find that's very analogous to the difference between being a salesperson and being a number one producer. And a lot of times it's thinking, as we talked about in the beginning, about leverage, about thinking like a business owner, and understanding, because in the music business, the one thing I always understood is if we were going to go play a club, they really didn't care about our music. What they cared about was how many drinks can they serve and how many people are coming to the club to actually see us. Right. So the more that we could get them dancing, the more that they would buy because they were hot. So they wanted to have a beverage. So they would go to the bar and buy more of what the bar offered. It always that was a greater outcome that if we played amazingly well that night and we thought, my gosh, Geffen Records was going to walk through here and, write us a deal or something like that. Right. So it's the business of the business that I think is the discipline part of that. And I would assume it's the same in dancing. I was not a dancer. My rhythm is good on music, but I step on my own feet when it comes to dancing. So
tell me, Doug, I know that you have a gift for all of our listeners today. So tell us about your gift.
So I wrote a book, an ebook actually, called the 1% Nonstop Earner. So it goes in for the philosophy and the psychology of what makes up a 1% earner. And it was kind of interesting to me, Wendy, because as I was studying this, what I realized is, as we alluded before, is, you have salespeople, you have sales earners, you have top producers, you have 1% earners and people in between. But what I noticed was there's not only the leverage component, but actually, how do we, as you said earlier, how do we think? And how do we train ourselves to think? So the cool part about, if anybody wants to get into the 1% earners, club, if you will, is we have to train our own brains. And we are consistently pushing ourselves through what I call emotional locks or stuck points in our life. And they usually formed in our childhood. And so, it might be For example, we grew up in a household that was consistently, and we were rewarded for negotiating on all levels. And I've seen this in selling. I mean, I remember watching one time, this person closed this major sale with a CEO. And then they went back, and the moment that CEO said, yep, we're good to go, they started renegotiating. And I was like, I know you're putting your hands to your head. It's the same thing, right? And if I had something heavy, I would have thrown it at the person that was talking, the salesperson. But the reality is, when I got talking with that individual, they grew up in an environment where they consistently negotiated. And it was like they were rewarded for that. I've seen, I never forget, a real estate agent one time, husband and wife wanted to buy this. The wife wanted to buy the house. The husband wanted to, but he was a little hesitant because it was a little more than he thought he wanted to go. And they were going back and forth. And she's like solid and like, honey, look, the kids can be out here by the pool and I'll cook you dinner when you come home. And he's like, oh, it's a little more than I wanted to go. She's like, you know what? I'll go back to my law practice. I'll work part-time and I'll pay for the mortgage. You don't even have to worry about it. I mean, she's putting the press on hard to get this house. And in the middle of it, the real estate agent said, guys, I think you ought to go home and think about this because I think this is a really important life decision. And long story short, Wendy, they ended up buying a house that was actually $600,000 more than the house that they wanted to buy. And it was right down 2 blocks from the same house that they were just looking at. And they bought it from a different real estate agent.
Of course they did. Of course they did.
Right? But that's somebody who grew up in a high environment of empathy where you don't push people even if it's for their own good. Right? So we as people who are learning the art and the skill of whatever, right? I mean, you were a dancer. I mean, if you feared going out in front of crowds, large crowds, and you didn't handle that self-objection, if you will, and become and resolve that, we'd always feel maybe judgment while we're going out on stage. I remember, when I was a DJ, I got the opportunity to do McDonald's Corporation Christmas party. And I was like, wow, all right. All these executives there, right? And then in the top of a building in Boston that we used to call the top of the hub, it was a 52nd floor. I mean, this place, they must have spent, I don't know, $500,000 to run this thing. And I remember going in there going, sheesh, you know what? I've worked with a lot of professionals. I wonder how this is going to go. And then I had to catch myself like, hey, dummy, you're a professional too, right? So it's one of those things that we always have to continuously work on. Oh, by the way, the event went amazingly well. And I think we ended up with 6 other jobs out of that particular, party. And so it is about the thought. And that's what the book really goes into. It goes into what's the profile of the thinking? How do you become one? And then.
And what's the title? What's the title?
The Nonstop 1% Earner.
Now, so we will post the link to ebook in the show notes. So as soon as you're finished listening to this podcast, go to the show notes, click on the link. And if people want to get in touch with you, where should they go?
Well, LinkedIn's probably the best for most people. They can send me a direct email at, Doug@ceosalesstrategies.com. I have a team who looks at my email and they might answer back first, but that's, those are the 2 best ways. And obviously, they can go to the URL that you have posted down below as well in the show notes.
And wonderful. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. You've been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders. Our special guest today is Doug C. Brown, with the CEO of CEO Sales Strategy. And if you found value in listening to today's podcast, then think about one business owner or one sales professional, one entrepreneur, somebody that you know that you think might also find value in listening to this podcast. And please do share the link with them. And until we meet again, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, really large bills.
You've been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. Be sure to follow so that you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share it with your friends. Tune in every week for more exciting insights and wisdom on transforming sales. And until next time, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, very large bills.